Okay, thank you everyone. This is now being recorded and I'm going to share my screen and I want to make it interactive, guys. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me and we can go over the information in more depth, right? But this was these are the June 2026 car form releases, right? And by the way, we or I guess yeah, we have decided to have some training for the rest of the year, and it'll probably be every Wednesday. We're gonna send you guys an email with a calendar. I know that some of you guys on this call did not receive the invitation, but we'll make sure that you guys do receive it. But basically, every Wednesday for the rest of the year at 10 in the morning, we're going to have information on training about, for example, the residential purchase agreement from a buyer's agent perspective, the residential purchase agreement from a listing agent perspective, right? Because when you guys call me, the first question out of my mouth is, well, who do you represent? Because that's going to depend on the advice I'm going to give you. If you represent the seller, then it'd be different than the buyer and so on. These forms were released June 16, 2026. So I do realize that we're a few weeks late, but we're going to explore the critical contract changes, specific edits that affect listing and disclosures, and identify legal shifts and best practices to mitigate risk, right? June new release forms, we have a couple of good ones, which I thought were interesting. It's that PRBS dash S. That means it's the possible representation of more than one buyer for the seller. And then the other one is PRBS B, not C, right? Jessica? Yeah. So, and then we have a new form called SWPI C and SWPI Q. So the C is for the cost, the Q is for the questionnaire. And we're going to look at these forms, right? On the purchase agreement, there's some additional changes to the RPA, the SCO, SMCO, right? Specifically for liquidated damages. I don't know if you guys have seen where the offer comes in, but the buyers, if they're integrated with DocuSign, like the buyer's option to click on liquidated damages is not required. So a lot of buyers just skip it. They don't do it, right? If that's the case, there's a new form for that. Agency and compensation. So we'll talk about BRBC, agency confirmation, AOAA, and of course the PRBS, right? Property disclosures, SPQ, TDS, ESD. All of those have had some changes to tighten documentation around disclosures. And tenancy, which we don't really do a lot of, but a lot of it is done actually in LA. And then if you guys remember, the famous or infamous SELI form is gone, and the SWPI is gone, but it's replaced with the C and the Q. So we got some new forms, right? The possible representation for more than one seller, right? They've changed it to seller and buyer, right? And essentially, if you guys don't know, what this form says is that if you look at number 2, acknowledgement and consent, right? It says how many times have you called an agent and said, hey, how many offers do you have and for how much, right? And they'll be like, oh, it's top secret. I can't tell you. Give me your highest and best offer. And I say to them, look, guys, asking price is 500, right? When I was active in real estate, I know they're not that much anymore. My highest and best offer is 375. So why don't you tell me if you have anything, at least asking, right? But they don't want to give you that information. And here's what 2A says. Offers are not necessarily confidential. Buyers advise that seller or listing agent may disclose the existing terms and conditions of a buyer's offer to other interested buyers and agents unless all parties and their agent have signed a written confidentiality agreement, CAR form NDA, which, by the way, I've only had one NDA in my career, and it was in Beverly Hills, right? They didn't want us to like disclose who the buyer was, who the entity was, because I suspect that that entity was probably owned by somebody famous, right? So in the absence of a signed NDA, buyer consent to such disclosure. Whether any such information is actually disclosed depends on many factors, such as current market conditions, prevailing practice in the real estate community, the listing agent's marketing strategy, and instructions of the seller. Now, if essentially you as a listing agent should or have the ability to disclose, yeah, man, I have 5 offers and here are the numbers for those offers, right? Now, unless you have a signed NDA, which is car form NDA, or the seller has given you specific instructions telling you, like, don't tell nobody about my offers or the prices or anything like that, right? In my opinion, when I'm representing a seller, and let's say that the asking price is 500,000, and I have an offer for, 500, 495, 499, 503 and 505, I'm probably going to disclose the top 3 offers and say, like, look, the highest offer I have is 505. If your buyer wants it, what do you think they're going to do? More than likely, they're going to come in over 505. At least that has been my experience in the past. So any questions on this strategy or what this PRBS says? And it's been there forever, by the way. The red is what has changed. Amazing. You guys are awesome. Okay, let's talk about the SWPI C, which this is basically instead of making it one form like it was before as to who was going to pay what, and they've now created a different form, right? And if you look at all the blue, the blue is the information as to, if excavation is going to happen within 17 days or 30 days or whatever, right? Fill in the blank. This is for septic, well, propane tank, and property boundaries. This is really like where I live, right? It's usually used in the rural areas like the high desert. I don't know if Emily Kroll and Liliana use this often, but if you do, it's usually rural areas that are not connected to sewer, right?
Yes.
So this is the SWPI-Q. And as you can tell, this one has a gazillion changes, right? So because it's going to ask you if there are multiple systems in the property, which we have. We had this one's interesting, guys. I'll tell you because it's relevant to this, right? They had 2 septic tanks. One of them was no good, and then the other one was newer. When the buyer moved in, he found the second septic tank, and he was upset because it wasn't disclosed to him, but the property was not connected to that secondary septic tank. So now they're asking that question, right? Is there multiple? If yes, then you got to give me some explanation. Any questions on this? Because I don't want to go over all of the information, but just a high level overview. And if you have anything to add, Jessica, please chime in.
Okay, I just really quickly wanted to add, if there is septic well or propane tank on the property, before the SWPI was required. So now, just to clarify, if any of those are on the property, then both the SWPI-C is required and the SWPI-Q. So both of them are required if there's septic well or propane on the property, in addition to all the other disclosures, right? Like the TDS, the SPQ, like everything else. So it's in addition to. The SWPI-Q does not replace like the SPQ. Also, just really quickly, in regards to the PRBS-B and the PRBS-S, the PRBS-B for the buyer is now included in the BRBS packet. And the PRBS-S is obviously included in the listing packet. There no longer is a PRBS in the offer packet. And you are required to only collect the PRBS from your side of the transaction from a compliance standpoint. So when we're auditing, if you represent the buyer, we're looking for the PRBS-B. If you represent dual, we need both.
Amazing. Thank you, Jessica. So we did go over the Q, right? Okay, yeah, the C and the Q, some of the listing forms, the residential purchase agreement, they just added some additional language on there, right? So let's see. So additional compensation to seller's broker. Now, I have seen several listing agreements where you guys go with the listing agreement pre-filled out, and then the seller does not understand or does not want you to make additional money from the seller, when they have an unrepresented party, right? And then if the broker is not representing the buyer, broker is advised to provide a non-represented buyer a non-agency agreement. That is something super important, because if you have an unrepresented buyer, which we've had, I would say since the whole NARCAR thing that I was made aware of, at least maybe 10. It could be more because Jessica deals with that more on a daily basis. But when people call me or agents call me asking me about an unrepresented buyer, I always tell them, you got to give them, first thing before you even engage in the conversation, is give them a buyer non-agency agreement, because you want to make sure that they understand that you do not work for them. Now, you have to be very careful on an unrepresented buyer, because the conversation could go something like this. Emily Kroll, I'm going to use you as an example because I know you pretty well. Emily, what do you think the contingency period should be on my offer? And then Emily's trying to be helpful and says, well, I mean, the lower the contingencies, the better opportunity you're going to have to getting your offer accepted. So I think you should make it 10. The moment she answered that question, even though it is not in writing, you have created agency with that client, right? So you definitely want to just be an information gatherer and said, like, look, because I don't work for you and you have signed the BNA, I cannot really answer that question. Just tell me what you would like to do, right?
So wait. If there are two, so this is not for dual agency. This is a buyer who seems to know real estate. They don't want any representation. They're going to represent themselves.
Correct.
Got it.
And it is for buyers that come in, right? And they have, perhaps maybe they are licensed in Georgia or Wyoming or whatever, and they feel like, look, I know enough about real estate that I want to go unrepresented. We also, it could just be somebody that has done a lot of research on YouTube and the internet, right? Because there are videos out there on how you can represent yourself. If the broker represents both buyer and seller must obtain a written agreement with the buyer that establishes the broker's right to compensation for buyer's side of the transaction. So BRBC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, purchase forms. This one, they have on the residential purchase agreement, they have made it clearer as to what you're asking for, right? Seller to credit buyer $5,000, $10,000 for closing costs, and other seller and credit payments. This is not your commission. So, for example, you could ask for a $5,000 credit for the buyer from the seller for closing costs, but you may also say you may already have, or the seller may already have a termite report, and it's going to be $6,000 to have the Section 1 clearance. So you could put $6,000 for, termite report, and everything is negotiable, right? So maybe you want the seller to pay $1,000 for an appraisal, whatever it is, right? And I'm still on G1 and G2. Appraisal contingency, right? So they have a, let's see, appraisal contingency based upon appraisal value, or at a minimum, the purchase price, or you put in a gap, right? So in other words, this was common during the pandemic. If the offer was $1 million, but you know that it wasn't going to appraise at $1 million, and your buyer was willing to write a check for 900, so you wanted to come at the purchase price or 900,000, which means the buyer will pay the gap. Unless you don't have an appraisal contingency, right? And then Q16 is all the forms that we talked about a little bit earlier, right? Which is the survey, the septic, propane tank, etc. Any questions on this? Anything you need to add, Jessica?
Hold on a sec. So wait,
Well, actually, one thing. Oh, go ahead,
Yep.
Emily.
go ahead. I lost your page. Where did it go? It was something about the septic well. So you're checking that. Where did you go? Hold on.
I'm right here on the residential purchase agreement, right? So if it is on Q16, which
Yeah.
is at the bottom, what you're looking at, you'd have to check on septic well, the survey, the form that you're going to use, which is car form SWPIC for the allocation of costs. Who's going to pay for what, right? Like,
Oh, that's the cost. Got it.
yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
and then the seller would then have to fill out the SWPI-Q, which is a questionnaire.
Yeah, got it. Seller payments. Got it. I missed that top section. Thank you.
Of course. So we have a whole bunch of other stuff that has been added, and all the red is the new stuff, right? So septic, disclosure, buyer's investigation, advisory, wire fraud, fair housing discrimination. All of these are just technically like boilerplate forms. And then of course the septic tank, which you're going to need to remember. The C is for the cost, who's going to pay for what. The Q is the seller filling out the questionnaire. Do you have 1 or 2 tanks? Do you have, where is it at? Do you know what the boundaries are and all that kind of stuff? So, continuing on the residential purchase agreement, if you guys remember that rule that came up from FinCEN, which was basically any entity, from what I remember, any entity or any cash transaction needed to be reported by escrow to FinCEN. That, I believe, that is no longer a rule as of right now still. But let's see, reporting person, escrow company, or closing is required of FinCEN. The property being purchased is real property 1 to 4, or vacant land. The buyer is a legal entity or trust. The buyer is making an all cash transaction. So the reporting person may request the data. Okay, so this is really just information for the buyer and the seller. Okay. The demand to close, let's talk about that for a second, right? After the demand to close period has lapsed, any subsequent cancellation must be delivered in writing and signed by the party canceling the agreement. If the seller cancels based on the DCE and the buyer still has a contingency, seller shall authorize the return of buyer's deposit except fees incurred by buyer and any other expenses already paid by escrow holder pursuant to this agreement. Because a lot of people think that once I serve you with the demand to close, that's it. It's done. No, you still need to do the cancellation of contract, which is card form CC. So just because you give them, because you can give them a demand to close no earlier than 3 days before closing, but still not cancel, right? And so now you're in that limbo. So somebody needs to usually the buyer say, well, if you didn't do it within 3 days, we're now at 5 days. Here's the cancellation, and it is still valid. Okay, so excuse me. Seller counter. We'll talk about this for a second. So the liquidated damages, right? Because many times what agents, including myself, have said is like, buyer to initial paragraph such and such for liquidated damages in arbitration. And then now we're altering the original contract, right? And then we go back and initial it. And now there's a form for that, right? So to be binding, the liquidated damages and arbitration of disputes paragraph in the offer each require initials by all parties. If either of those paragraphs is not initialed by all parties, that paragraph is excluded from the final agreement unless initialed by all parties in the offer or in an addendum, such as the liquidated damages and arbitration agreement. That's the car form LDAA. That's a new form, right, Jessica?
I don't think it's new, but I think it was revised this time around.
Okay. Thank you. So let's see, down payment, loan amount, deposit credits, unless otherwise agreed or altered in another counteroffer of the down payment and loan amount will be adjusted in the same proportion as the original offer, but the dollar amount of any initial and increased deposit and seller credit shall remain unchanged of the original offer. Appraisal gap, right? It talks about the appraisal gap. So on the offer, if you know that, and again, during the pandemic, this was super common, but today, you may not want to use that appraisal gap and saying like, we're buying it for $1 million. We know it's going to appraise for 850. So we'll pay the 150 out of pocket. Questions on this?
Roger had a question about the liquidated damages clause.
Hi, Christine.
I know I'm your favorite agent. So I have a question for that. So is it basically that they're not really forced to or required to initial that?
Well, it's never been mandatory, right?
Yeah.
From a risk management broker realtor perspective, look, we don't want you guys suing each other, and by the way, I'll give you an example because the liquidated damages is up. The way that the contract is written is 3% of the sales price, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the deposit, whichever is less. Now, let's talk about that for a second. $1 million sales price. The EMD is $20,000 and something goes wrong. And now the liquidated damages clause needs to be brought up, right? And the seller is going to say, wait a minute, the liquidated damages say 3% because they stopped reading there, which would be $30,000. So guess what, Mr. Buyer, you got to write me a check. I'm going to keep the $20,000 in escrow. Plus you got to write me a check for 10 because that's 3% of $1 million. The answer is no. It says 3% up to 3% or the deposit, whichever one is less. Right?
Okay. So, can you just, 2 questions. Can you say whether or not they should sign this? If you're representing
Yes.
a buyer, should they be signing this?
Yes, they should, because what if it's $1 million and you want to make your offer strong and you say that you're going to put $100,000 in escrow and now you don't have the liquidated damages in arbitration disputes, right? And then now you are bound to whatever is in the deposit. You want to minimize the buyer's losses should something happen. So I have explained that to my buyers, and 100% of the time, I want the liquidated damages, right? Even if I'm representing the seller, I want the liquidated damages because in my opinion, it is fair for all parties to have a maximum that you can lose.
Okay. So if the buyer, let's just say you're representing a buyer, if they don't sign this, can the seller sue them for unlimited damages beyond 3% or the deposit?
It's possible because
Okay.
they don't have that ceiling of 3%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also remember that the arbitration, so it goes mediation and then arbitration. What you don't want is you don't want these two parties, buyers and sellers, to get into a lawsuit and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Why?
Yeah.
Because they're going to arbitration. Let's go to arbitration. And if we don't agree in arbitration or we don't agree to what the arbitrator says, then we go to, let's go to mediation. And if we don't agree in mediation, then we go to arbitration and it ends there. Whatever the arbitrator says, which is usually a retired judge, we're going to roll with. If you don't have that, it could get nasty, right? Now we're lawsuit and against lawsuit. And now it costs more money to have a lawsuit versus a mediation and then arbitration.
Okay. So I was told once upon a time that you are not allowed to advise them or tell them to initial this and that they're supposed to consult with an attorney. Does that still stand?
That does still stand, but from a risk management experience, broker's perspective, realtor's perspective, what would you suggest, Christine? Because I am paying you a commission that eventually the seller may pay it or may not pay it, but I'm agreeing to paying you 3%. What would you recommend?
Got it. Okay.
right? So,
Yes. Thanks for going over that. Appreciate it.
of course. Seller multiple counteroffer. Remember, if the paragraph on the RPA is not signed, then you got to use that LDAA form, right? You still got the appraisal contingency gap, and this is also on the seller multiple counter and the buyer counter, LDAA. So don't say on your seller counter, which would be this one or this one, don't say, paragraph such and such to be, initial by all parties liquidated damages. No, you got to get the LDAA form started. Okay, disclosures and addendums. Okay, this one actually, I'm kind of glad that they added this language in here, right? Because one of the biggest problems that I see, that I get a lot of calls on, and that reminds me, is TDS. We have, Rogers Zelaya LLC selling the property. They bought it in 2002. They never lived in the property, and they live in Wyoming. So they are saying they're not going to give us a transfer disclosure statement. That is incorrect. They have to. Well, they've never lived in the property. They never visited the property. Well, then they need to either get in a plane and go to the property, or they need to disclose to the best of their ability, right? But even if the seller is exempt from completing a transfer disclosure statement, such as a bank on an REO or a probate, right? Then the seller may not the TDS seller may not be exempt from water heater and smoke detector compliance requirements, CCAR form, WHS for more information. Now, I'm actually, before this call, I had somebody call me and say, hey, the seller gave us a $19,000 credit. The appraiser went to the property, and the appraiser is requesting smoke detectors and CO2. And she said, get it out of the $19,000 we gave you. And the answer is no. The answer, it's on the purchase agreement, and it is California law to brace the water heater and to have smoke detector compliance, which brings me to something else. But let me see if I can just get out of this training and show you guys something real quick. When in doubt, right? Many times when you guys call me, about the, say, smoke detectors. So I go to car, right? And I put in smoke detectors, and then it will give me all of the information about the law, right? Or if you guys call me like, hey, the buyer, they have a post closing dispute, then I go here and then I read this information. So car.org is a huge resource that you guys can use at any given time. I think we're on this one. Yeah. Okay, so let's see, liquidated damages. This is the form, right? For the counteroffer or an amendment. Let's see, liquidated damages and arbitration. So this is basically having you guys re-sign it rather than going back and altering the contract, which is fine. Okay, this one is notice of broker involved properties. Now, I got a phone call on this, right? And the list of people, broker involved properties, right? Let's see, compensation agreement, broker involved properties. Okay, so, oh, sorry, this is this is correct. On the broker involved properties, the agent canceled the listing, but they put on number 4 if Jessica, Christine, Emily, Liliana, Julian, all of us are agents, right? And if those people purchase this property, then they are to pay another commission. And the answer is, well, I mean, what they really were saying is the buyers that Roger and Jessica and Christine brought, right? So unless Roger ends up buying the property, then they owe a commission. But typically speaking, you got to know to fill out this form properly, right? So, and this is for the buyer to let them know, like, look, yeah, I'll terminate your buyer representation agreement, but if you buy 123 Main Street, XY 567 XYZ Street, and so on, then I'm entitled to a commission. But a lot of people don't know how to use this form. When in doubt, call me and I can help you fill it out, right? And this particular one is for buyer representation agreements, but this guy did it for a cancellation of listing, which is totally different. And we're almost coming to an end. And these are the forms that are no more. The SELI, which is a seller election to exclude listing from the internet, is no longer included because the information is on MLSA, and I believe it's paragraph 4, but it's page 3, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going off of memory. Could be the last page. It could be 3 or 4, but if in doubt, remember that every MLS, I'm a member of 69 MLSs, and I cannot keep track of 69 different rules. And so when you call me about, can I exclude it from the internet, from a California Association of Realtors perspective, the answer is yes. And you have to use CAR form MLSA. However, your local association /MLS may require you to register that property that's not going on the MLS with them. So CRMLS has different rules. CDAR has different rules. In NorCal, Sacramento Association of Realtors has different rules. So I can't keep up with all of them. So you got to call your local MLS. And then, of course, the SWPI, which was septic well property monument allocation of cost addendum, it's been replaced by the SWPIC and the SWPIQ. And that is it for today. And I want to say that this training was put together by Jessica DeFerrari. So thank you very much for putting it together and putting the slides together. And like I said, likely next Wednesday, we're going to have another class on, residential purchase agreement from a buyer's agent perspective. And then the next week from a seller's agent perspective, because the advice and how the paragraph numbers help you as a buyer or listing agent are completely different the way that they should be interpreted. Do you guys have any questions? Well, let's open it up to Q&A.
One quick question. It's
Yes.
Emily.
Fine.
Could you give an example on that appraisal gap? I'm jet lagged and my brain isn't 100% today. On the appraisal gap, just a scenario with the appraisal gap situation.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Let me get to it. And again, in my opinion, you know what? I'm going to stop the recording because I think we should be good for that for now.